From the castle in Owings Mills, it is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer live on a Thursday in January to discuss Jesse Minter's introductory press conference. We'll talk about what we learned from the Ravens' new head coach, what we learned from general manager Eric DeCosta as well. And then we'll get to some updates on Jesse Minter's staff, some coaches coming, some coaches going, all that and much, much more. But first, let's get a quick word from our sponsor.
For the fifth year in a row, Toyota is the best resale value brand according to Kelley Blue Book's KBB.com, including the 2025 Grand Highlander, best in resale value for midsize SUVs. Toyota, let's go places.
All right, Jonas, we are here to talk about Jesse Minter's introductory press conference, and I think you could say that he brings a breath of fresh air, a minty breath of fresh air, if you will. But more importantly, his hiring, as was the hiring of the Orioles' new manager, Craig Albernes,
here we go,
is a win for Short Kings. Afterwards, we had the chance to go up and shake his hand. I was making eye contact with him. I mean, we were eye to eye. I stand at 5'8" and 3/4, and
very important. 3/4. You don't just round up.
No, I would never round up. That would be lying.
Did you lie in your dating profile to get your current girlfriend?
No, I set myself as 5'8". I rounded down.
Wow.
Yeah. Can you believe it?
When Rachel saw you, be like, oh wow, you're taller than I thought.
Maybe. Yeah, she was like, those extra 3/4 of an inch really make you loom over me.
Right.
Tall drink of water. That's what they call me. No, this is great that we have Craig Albernes, who's like 5'8". Jesse Minter looked to be about 5'8". Two short guys now in charge of both Baltimore sports teams.
Eric DeCosta, not exactly a domineering presence. How big are the Orioles front office officials?
Mike Elias is pretty tall.
Okay.
Yeah. So that, we need a common man who stands at average height to look eye to eye with. Jonas, let's talk about what we heard from Jesse Minter, not just what we saw in Jesse Minter. His introduction brought out a crowd. We saw some current players come out. We saw Justice Hill. Nice to see him after he ended the season on injured reserve. Nick Moore was there. Teddy Buchanan was there. Did you get a good look at what he had on his lower body as he recovers from his surgery?
I did not. I mean, I talked to him right after his ACL injury, and he was spending time in the Memorial Chamber. He was spending time around the facility, obviously. I think John Harbaugh said at the end of last season that he was hoping for Teddy to come back by the start of training camp. We'll see. That might be a little bit of an aggressive rehab schedule, but he didn't really seem to be that uncomfortable walking around, which is a good thing for him.
Yep. We saw Travis Jones was there. We saw, of course, in terms of front office members, up on the dais with him was Sashi Brown. Sorry, Eric DeCosta. In the audience was Steve Bisciotti, not talking. Ozzie Newsome was, of course, there. Dick Cass was there. Former players, Torrey Smith, Jimmy Smith. Not in the audience, Jonas, was Lamar Jackson. Did that surprise you at all?
No, because he's never really made himself available for these kind of things. I think what's important is that Jesse Minter said that they've already had a couple conversations, that there's an understanding that relationships take time and that this is going to be an ongoing process. And we are here in late January, and even if they barely know each other's last names, I'm sure they'll get to a reasonable stage of friendship and association by mid-June, by whenever mandatory minicamp swings around. So I imagine we probably won't be getting the chance to talk to Lamar for at least a couple more months because of how the offseason swings around. Hopefully there are no more out of nowhere trade requests that bamboozle us at inopportune times. Obviously, if Lamar signs a deal over the next couple months, that might be another opportunity for us to check in on how he's doing, how his relationship with Jesse Minter is doing. But yeah, not really a huge surprise that Lamar wasn't there, even though, you could say it probably would have been a nice show of face to just be there for your new era guy.
I think it's fair to say it would have been a nice show of face. We don't know whether Lamar Jackson took Steve Bisciotti up on Bisciotti's offer to fly him from Florida up to Owings Mills in his private jet in order to meet all of the final candidates. We do know that Eric DeCosta enlisted the help of players both on the offensive side and the defensive side to meet with some of these candidates. as they were going through their final round of interviews, and they will continue to enlist these players as they look for coordinators and some of the assistants. Eric DeCosta never mentioned Lamar Jackson by name, so we don't know whether Lamar was part of that process, but the fact that Jesse Minter has already had, as he said, multiple conversations with Lamar Jackson is a good sign.
Yeah, of course.
Not sure.
All right. We might have to, I don't know. Let's just keep going.
Yep.
There was someone knocking on the door. Come in if you can hear us, but if not, don't. There was, I think the fact that they are considering player input is important. Again, it's not going to be the overwhelming factor in the overwhelming criterion in deciding exactly who is qualified for a head coaching job, offensive coordinator job, defensive coordinator job. But these guys have questions that I think are probably more practical, related than big picture things like how do you feel about practice? How do you feel about nutrition? What is your relationship like with your assistant coaches? All that kind of stuff that needs to be hashed out. And again, I think making players feel like they have ownership as part of this decision is an important consideration. But there's so many factors that go into this: availability, salary, the fact if you're qualified or underqualified, just the timing for certain guys. I mean, obviously, it seems like most of the guys who the Ravens were associated with, who were in the playoffs, are now available. So there's not a whole lot of waiting around for a Clint Kubiak, because obviously he's not coming to Baltimore as the head coach. But yeah, I mean, it's good that the Ravens, were willing to get guys who were showing an interest in this. It wasn't just a random hodgepodge of players who were considered as part of the interview process. It was guys who Eric DeCosta said wanted to be part of this interview process. And I think that's a good sign for where this culture is. The fact that you have players stepping up and saying, hey, I want to be heard in this.
Yeah.
And the fact that the front office and ownership was amenable to that and said, hey, what's your availability? Because if we feel like you are an important part of this process, then we'll make you a part of it.
Yeah. Let's talk about our overall impression of the press conference as a whole, because he steps out onto the stage. We honestly haven't heard Jesse Minter talk a whole lot. As a defensive coordinator, he doesn't have to talk to the media a whole heck of a lot. This was our first chance to really meet him and to get to ask these questions. And my first thought was, he doesn't light up the room the way that John Harbaugh did. And I think that that's an important distinction, because you watch John Harbaugh's press conference with the Giants, you watched any of his press conferences with Baltimore, he just has this kind of energetic presence that automatically gravitates people towards him. And Jesse Minter didn't quite have that buoyant personality, but I think that's fine. He's not running for office here. He's just trying to win football games, and he's trying to get players on his side. He doesn't have to, as you put in an article on thebanner.com, where people can subscribe $1 for 6 months, doesn't have to, quote unquote, win the press conference in order to be a successful NFL head coach. But at the same time, I still thought he was polished. I thought he was professional. I thought he was well-spoken. I thought he had a lot of interesting things to say. And I think that he came off very well in front of the media, in front of the assembled Ravens staff, in front of current and former players, and in front of the nation, in front of the cameras.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't bring out the driver for this press conference, so to speak. I don't play a lot of golf, so forgive me for my golf parlance, but he brought out an iron, hit one right down the fairway, didn't go 320 yards, but it landed in the middle of the green.
Sure.
I think if you were to,
maybe a 3 wood.
Sure.
Okay.
whatever you want to go with. I think if you were to have made a Ravens press conference bingo with all the things that you expected to hear from a new Ravens coach, especially one as familiar with the Ravens culture and the Ravens building and the Ravens officials as Jesse Minter, you probably would have got bingo. Like right there in the middle would have been play like a Raven. We got play like a Raven. We had to wait a little bit for it. It was the end of that presser, but we got Jesse Minter saying that Lamar Jackson is the best quarterback in the NFL, best player in the NFL. We heard him talk about wanting connectors as coaches. We heard him talking about his belief in the locker room, his expectations for success. It was interesting that the one time that he himself mentioned a Super Bowl or championships was in the context of Lamar Jackson. I don't know if that was intentional, but I think that was interesting that he didn't really overextend himself in terms of what he was promising or what he wanted to deliver to Baltimore because he knows, he barely knows this team. Like he I think is probably still going through film, still going through all the coaches that he's going to put together. But the thing that I maybe fixated on and I wrote about in our takeaways was it was notable to me that in his prepared opening remarks, he did say that he wants the Ravens to be at their best when they have to be at their best. And when you think about why Steve Bisciotti got rid of John Harbaugh, it was because this team won a lot of games from September to December, but come playoff time, they had a way of folding, and their best players had a very disturbing tendency of not showing up. So if he can get this team to a point where they are delivering and we get the best Lamar and we get the best Roquan and Kyle Hamilton, and the pass rush can show up in ways that it hasn't, and you can find a way to reverse the 3-6 record that John Harbaugh has or had in Baltimore since 2018, then that's going to win him a lot of goodwill with this Ravens fan base. But it's not really a sure thing. I mean, Jesse Minter won the college football playoff at Michigan. That was a great defense that he put together. But you look at this Chargers defense the past 2 years. I think they played well against the Patriots in their unfortunate loss, but I think they allowed 400 plus yards to the Texans last year in a blowout loss. That wasn't really the defense's fault, but they could have made it a little bit more competitive. And then even this year, probably did not get the A+ effort that he was hoping for from that Chargers defense. So even though he comes in with this pedigree, even though he himself, was in charge of a national championship winning defense at Michigan, I still think there are a lot of questions about whether he himself can get this team and this locker room and his coaching staff to a place where they feel like whenever they step on the field in the playoffs, whether it's against the Chiefs in Arrowhead or against the Bills in Orchard Park, they feel like they are the team that should win every single down.
Right. And how do you do that? How do you get your players to play their best at the times when they are required to play their best? Right. It's an impossible question to answer. And there's a reason why so many coaches in the NFL can be great regular season coaches or even good first round coaches in the playoffs, first couple rounds, but can't get over the hump. I mean, Andy Reid, before he won his first Super Bowl with the Chiefs, was known as somebody who was a great regular season coach, would get his team to a conference championship game, but could not get them over the hump. It is incredibly difficult to do because it is playing in the highest stakes at the toughest moment at the end of the season when your team is not 100% healthy, when the weather conditions are not the best. It's an inexact science. Nobody really knows how to do it. Great coaches struggle with it all the time. Mike Tomlin just left Pittsburgh in part because he was not able to win the critical games over the last decade that he needed to. So it's very, very difficult. But I can understand why Jesse Minter sold the Ravens brass on it. Why he made that a talking point, because the Ravens brass needs to be confident that he can do that he can bring out the best in his guys at those critical moments. But at the same time, yeah, he was here a few years ago in a lower role. But like you said, Jonas, he doesn't really know these guys. And he acknowledges that. He said these relationships take time. He said, it is going to take a while for me to acclimate myself to all of the players on this team. It's a difficult thing to do in addition to the play calling, in addition to hiring a staff. There is so much on his plate right now. And it's so tough to ask a first-year head coach to come in and not just hit the ground running in the regular season, get his team where it needs to be in playoff position, but then to do something that your predecessor couldn't and take that team to a Super Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, just the first step here is just getting this team back to the playoffs. I mean,
right.
Steve Bisciotti highlighted how the past 3 years was one step down after another, from AFC Championship game to AFC Divisional round to out of the playoffs altogether. And, Steve said that even if the Ravens had won that game against the Steelers, even if Tyler Loop had made that kick, he still felt like John Harbaugh was on the chopping block. And that was just because of what he felt the program had started to become. And this is a breath of fresh air. This is a restart. This is a chance to get fresh eyes on what we think is a talented team. It's definitely not a perfect team. But you look around the NFL, I mean, who is perfect? This is I think if you were to roll the balls out, week 1, Ravens against Patriots, and you were to say like Vegas make the odds, I think even in New England next year, like the Ravens might be the favorites because Lamar, and because they might have the advantage at key positions. So it's going to be interesting to see just how this staff comes together, this roster comes together. Obviously, the Ravens could have a lot of wiggle room in both ways if Lamar signs this deal. But Jesse said that he felt like this was the best coaching job out there, and he's right.
Yeah.
I think the Ravens probably have the best coaching hire of the cycle because of how other high-profile jobs, other high-profile front offices have kind of botched or wasted the potential that they had for a truly transformative hire.
Yeah. In terms of how he plans to work with this front office, he, of course, had good things to say about Eric DeCosta. But the first time he was asked about who he reports to, he sort of dodged that question because the structure with John Harbaugh as head coach was John Harbaugh does not report to Eric DeCosta. John Harbaugh reports directly to Steve Bisciotti. Eric DeCosta reports directly to Steve Bisciotti. And we didn't know if a first-year head coach would be afforded that kind of level of autonomy. The second time around, Eric DeCosta essentially did say the structure is going to remain in place. Like John Harbaugh, Jesse Minter will report to Steve Bisciotti, as will I, separately. To you, Jonas, why was it important that that question get answered?
Well, I think fans are interested in it. I think there's always palace intrigue around these kind of power struggles. If they do indeed manifest, you saw just how much of a hang up it was for the Giants in hiring John Harbaugh. And, the deal was supposedly done there on a Wednesday, but we didn't get word about it being finalized until Friday or Saturday. And, that was a very, very important consideration for the Giants ownership in terms of getting John Harbaugh onto at least an even step with Joe Shane or even higher above. We didn't get crystal clear clarity on this as being a 50-50 partnership with Jesse Minter and Eric DeCosta. But when you heard Eric rave about how important and how foundational this pre-existing setup with John Harbaugh has been to this team's success, it would seem a little bit surprising if they went and had a reversal or they went 60-40 or 75-25 with the power going to Eric DeCosta just because of the seniority he has and because he has been responsible for a lot of what this team has been built like. And I know people have their issues with Eric DeCosta, especially after how last offseason kind of unfolded. But it's going to be interesting. I think we'll probably want to get more clarity from Jesse Minter about how exactly the first couple of months have been in terms of the delegation process. Obviously, he's going to have his say in the draft room, but he's not going to be the one making the picks. It's going to be Ozzie Newsome at the front of that table. It's going to be Eric DeCosta consulting everyone and then pulling the trigger. But yeah, I think the best hope for a situation like this is that we aren't asking what exactly is the setup here, because that will mean that something is rotten in the state of Denmark.
Right. I think the explanation, if they had gone with a different structure, if they had put Jesse Minter lower on the totem pole than Eric DeCosta, would be Jesse Minter's never done this before. And John Harbaugh was the head coach before Eric DeCosta was the GM. I know Eric DeCosta obviously was part of the front office for forever under Ozzie Newsome, but you could say, all right, as soon as Eric DeCosta took over, John had already established himself as a Super Bowl winner. We have to give them pretty much equal power. In this case, Eric DeCosta was part of the hiring committee to bring Jesse Minter in. So I would understand if they put him below Eric DeCosta. So I think it's interesting that from day one, Jesse Minter is getting this kind of level of autonomy in terms of getting to report directly to Steve Bisciotti. It's also just going to be fascinating to see how this plays out because John Harbaugh had so much job security year in and year out. It was surprising to us for so many reasons that John Harbaugh got fired when he did, and in part because year after year, John Harbaugh continued to stand up there and speak for the team over and over again. And Jesse Minter is coming in as a younger guy who has all of this pressure to come in and win from day one. And he's given equal power as Eric DeCosta. And now if things go awry, who takes the blame? Is it Jesse Minter? Is it the new head coach? Or is it Eric DeCosta? Because Steve Bisciotti put an edict on this whole team, from the front office to the coaching staff, everybody, that they need to figure out what went wrong last year and fix it. And if things continue to go wrong, you do wonder if the ire will be shifted more towards the front office and Eric DeCosta's side, and if Jesse Minter will be given the benefit of the doubt.
I mean, just to be cynical here, I guess if you're Eric DeCosta, the most advantageous angle for you to play is getting more of the power that was ceded by John Harbaugh, that was left to this power vacuum, but maintaining an illusion of 50-50 partnership, because that way you get the best of both worlds, at least until the ugly truth comes out. You get more say in roster building. You get more say in a lot of delicate matters up at the top of the org chart. But if things go poorly, then you can say, well, this was a team decision. This was not a unilateral decision. This was a bilateral decision, a trilateral decision. So hopefully we get more clarity on whether, in fact, this is, a meet the new boss, same as the old boss type of setup, or if the seniority that Eric DeCosta has and the relative greenness that Jesse Minter is coming with leads to a little bit of a change in how things are done here in one winning drive.
Yeah, and I wouldn't expect Jesse Minter to come in and in his first draft, before he's even coached a game, be making demands of the front office or be pinpointing specific guys and saying, we need to draft this guy no matter what. I would find that very hard to believe that he would throw his weight around like that. But if you get a few years into this partnership and he feels more confident, you could understand him wanting to have a little bit more say over the draft, over player personnel, over who makes the roster, all this kind of stuff. And so that's where I think all of this will get very interesting. And I do think from a psychological standpoint, I mean, Jesse Minter is returning to the building that he was a low-level assistant in for several years. And he talked about how it was humbling to come back here and be treated with a hero's welcome and suddenly be, for lack of a better term, the king of the castle. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you also wonder if he subconsciously feels the need to establish himself, to say, I'm no longer the lower guy in the totem pole. I am the guy now who is in charge. And maybe that means having a louder voice. It doesn't seem to me like he wants to be the center of attention. He just doesn't strike me as that kind of guy. And I also think, but at the same time, he wants to establish that he is at the top of this organization. It's a tough rope to walk here.
Yeah, I think you could read between the lines of him when he was asked about the kind of coaches that he wants for his coordinator jobs, leaders, connectors, scheme builders. I think he probably sees himself in those three traits. He is a leader of men. He is a connector. He is, a scheme lord. So if he hires those guys and they don't work out, then where does that leave the Ravens in year two? Because we saw just how quickly Mike Macdonald was willing to move on from, his offensive coordinator, his offensive line coach, his QB's coach, just do a clean sweep of some very, very important positions after it did not really work all that great with Geno Smith. He brings in Clint Kubiak, bringing a new offensive line coach, new QB's coach, and boom, here they are in the Super Bowl with not a huge amount of, not a tremendous infusion of offensive talent. So it's going to be interesting. Obviously, we don't want to look too far ahead. We don't want to assume the worst for what year one could be, because I think we both think highly of Jesse and what this team could be in 2026. But I think that would probably be a potential source of tension between, Eric DeCosta and the other front office officials and Jesse Minter, who wanting to give his guys a little bit of a chance to find themselves, even though we're in this window where the closer Lamar gets to age 35, the smaller you could say this championship window gets.
Right. And I think if there is one area, if I were Eric DeCosta, if I were this front office, where I would maybe not cede control, but I would heavily rely on the input of Jesse Minter, it would be on the defensive side of the ball. It would be determining which cornerbacks, which safeties, which linebackers, which players you want to keep and which players you want to move on from. Because there are several pivot points that this organization could go down on the defensive side of the ball. I think Marlon Humphrey is obviously the biggest one, entering his final year under contract and whether he remains on the team or not. There is still obviously the giant anvil hanging over all of this, which is what happens with Nnamdi Madubuike. That is yet to be determined as well. How much this team needs to invest in pass rushers, whether they need to go out there and try to spend big, acquire via trade somebody who is going to be an elite pass rusher, or that whether they can continue to build through the draft as well. So what I would do is rely heavily on what Jesse Minter wants, what he is looking for in player archetypes, what he's looking for in cornerbacks, how much depth he's looking for there. If he can get by with the pass rushers he has, or if he needs to add them. So this is an area where you need to use Jesse Minter as an asset on the defensive side of the ball in particular. And I think it's critical because I think there are more pivot points there than perhaps on the offensive side where things are a little bit more set.
And it does sound, from what I think Jesse said today and from what Ravens officials have said at other public press conferences, that Roquan will be a part of this team's plans for 2026. And obviously that it was a big question considering just how big his cap hit is in 2026. But I think because of what the expectations are for linebackers in a system that will probably play with as many light boxes as this 2026 team and will. And obviously, if you want to get a little bit more in depth, and I urge you guys to check back and listen to our previous podcast with Cody Alexander of Match Quarters, just to get a sense for what exactly that Ravens defense might look like. But Roquan was talked about prominently, so I think it's pretty safe to assume for us that he will be back in this next year. And obviously, I think fans feel differently and don't really feel like his Pro Bowls and All Pro honors match up with what he actually delivers on a week-to-week basis. But I think this defense needs someone as smart and as tough and as physical as him. I mean, that those four descriptors kind of match up with what he said he wants this Ravens defense, this Ravens team to play like.
Yeah, physical, tough, relentless together are the four adjectives. Although, is together an adjective?
It might be like an adverb.
Might be an adverb.
Yeah.
We'll get back to you on that. Those are the four descriptors that Jesse Minter used to describe his team. You could also, glass half full side, say maybe Jesse Minter is going to re-unlock what Roquan was under Mike McDonald. Maybe the reason he has not been playing great the past couple of years is one, the lack of, not lack of, but worsening talent around him, struggling with rookie linebackers next to him, essentially. And two, not having a coordinator who is able to maximize his abilities. So from that standpoint, I think you could say Roquan Smith there's reason to believe he will get better next year. Anything else that stuck out to you? It wasn't, what I was a little bit surprised by was it wasn't as Lamar centric as I thought that press conference would be, just because he is so much a part of what this team has to do this offseason. He's the franchise face. He's a 2-time MVP, but also he is now entering an offseason where they either need to restructure his contract or take on a massive, massive cap hold for him next season. And the owner has publicly said he wants to get something done. He wants to get an extension done before the start of free agency in March. And also considering all of the stuff that we've been hearing about Lamar Jackson and what he wants, if he is, in on this coaching hire, if he was a part of the process. I was just a little bit surprised that we didn't get more insight into how big a part of the process he was, and where this team goes from here with Lamar.
Yeah, we're as with a lot of Lamar stuff, we're just kind of fumbling about in the dark, trying to get our hands around something solid. It might be that the next opportunity we get on Lamar and on Jesse and their relationship, like I said, is that extension press conference, because I think there's a chance that we get Jesse at a coordinator hiring presser, but it'll probably just be the coordinators that we're talking to. Maybe Jesse talks at the NFL Combine in late February, but that could also just be Eric DeCosta, or it could be neither. I don't think teams are obligated to send those guys up there for the masses to be interviewed. So, it's obviously, I agree with you that it was surprising how light on Lamar things were, but I think there are a lot of questions just about how this process was, what it might look like, what the expectations were for this team in 2026. So I think we probably got a lot more juice out of the Steve Bisciotti presser on January 13th.
For sure.
about what exactly Lamar's role is in 2026 and beyond. I mean, I think the fact that we got a very public commitment from Steve Bisciotti to this team being Lamar's team should have, allayed a lot of fears that he might, for some reason, be on the trade block. So, I
think if the Steve Bisciotti press conference was Marty Supreme, this press conference was closer to, I don't want to say Hamnet because that was a depressing movie.
Yeah.
But certainly did not have as many highlights and as many heart-stopping moments as Marty Supreme, aka the Steve Bisciotti press conference.
Did you happen to see the viral video of the cast and crew of Hamnet doing a Rihanna dance break at the end of their filming?
Not at all.
Oh, it's incredible. It's them dancing for like a good minute and a half to "We Found Love in a Hopeless Place."
Nice.
Just like, the cast in their period costumes, and then Chloe Zhang comes out, and you see the rest of the crew just dancing, and when that beat drops, it is just like pure ecstasy.
Wow. I wish we got some kind of moment like that at the end of this press conference.
No, we did not get. We should talk about things we did not get. We did not get. We got a fatherly coaching figure, but we did not get the involvement of a coach's dad like we might have if John Harbaugh were reintroduced here as coach, with his dad being a part of it. We didn't get a.
It is fascinating that Jesse Minter is likely probably going to bring his father along with him, the guy that got him into coaching, coach's son as well.
We didn't get the team. We didn't get a who's got it better than. There weren't a lot of put it on a t-shirt type quotes. And I don't think that really matters. I mean, obviously it makes our jobs harder when it comes to figuring out exactly how to, what to put on a headline. But like we said, he just hit a nice drive down the fairway. And I don't think he's ever going to be a guy who's going to win the press conference. I think the guy that you saw today is going to be the same kind of guy that we see after a 31-14 loss to the Chiefs, and it's going to be the same guy that you might see after a 28-27 win in the Super Bowl.
Right.
I think he is going to be as steady as a heartbeat, and I think that's the kind of temperament that you want from a coach. And I think that's probably something that has frustrated some Ravens players from John Harbaugh. Just he did bring the juice, but there was some inconsistency with his messaging, or just him, like, I don't want to say crashing out, but just him being a little bit more attuned to the highs and lows of a season, and that affecting how he coached the team.
Right. And it's in Jesse Minter's best interest in a lot of ways not to go out there and make headlines today, not to have stuff, because ultimately that stuff can fly back in your face if it doesn't work out. Ultimately, you give yourself attention that you don't necessarily need. You may say something wrong here or there. You may be misconstrued. People could take a soundbite here or there and blow it up. There weren't many soundbite moments, but I think that that's okay. The most important thing is that they go out there and win, and that he connects with these players, and he gets these players to believe in him. All right, let's talk about some changes to the Ravens coaching staffs and some changes around the NFL as a whole, because we don't yet know who the Ravens offensive coordinator will be. We don't yet know who the Ravens defensive coordinator will be. We've gotten a couple hires on Jesse Minter's staff, though. Jesse Minter did not confirm any of them, but these have been reported widely. We already talked about Mike Mickens on last week's episode. He's entering as the defensive backs coach and defensive pass game coordinator. The Ravens have also reportedly hired Dwayne Ledford as their offensive run game coordinator and offensive line coach. To me, offensive coordinator is the most important hire. This is a hugely important hire because that was the area of the offense that undid everything last year. And I expect a lot of names and faces to change on the offensive line, personnel-wise, but getting the right coach in place here is also critically important.
Yeah. Rave reviews from the folks who know him. Brandon Thorne, who does great work for his Substack about offensive line play. Duke Manyweather, who obviously does good work with offensive line masterminds, I think in Texas, is a big fan of his. Obviously, everyone around the NFL, as soon as he became available in Atlanta, with them bringing in Bill Callahan on that Kevin Stefanski staff, was like, this guy is the dude to get. And I think the fact that the Ravens were able to land him, we didn't hear from Steve Bisciotti, but I think the influence that he has is becoming apparent because he's willing to open the pocket. He's willing to open his wallet and pay big money for really good coaches, and a lot of really good coaches.
Right. And that money doesn't come out of the salary cap. That's money that the owner pays.
Yeah. And I imagine that Dwayne Ledford did not come cheap. And because of the relative stability of offensive line coaches, and frankly, because of the relative lack of ceiling of offensive line coaches. When you get a good one, you can keep them here for a long, long time. You think of what Philly's been able to do. You think of like what Buffalo's been able to do with their offensive line coaches. Jeff Stoutland has, I think, a similar role with the Eagles, not just being the offensive line coach, but really being involved with the schemes there and being a part, basically a part-time run game designer, if not full-time run game designer. So he is going to be interesting. Dwayne Ledford is, because when you look at some of the next level, analytics about what he did for that Atlanta offense, it was a lot of outside zone. It was a lot of stretch run plays. That is, that was a part of this Ravens offense, and it's obviously something Derrick Henry is familiar with from his time in Tennessee, where they ran a lot of outside zone. But this Falcons offense, I think, for the past 3 years, I looked this up on Sports Info Solutions, of like the 96 separate seasons in terms of the amount of stretch runs over the past 3 seasons. The 2025 Falcons, the 2024 Falcons, and the 2023 Falcons were at the tippy top in terms of the amount of stretch runs for any team in the NFL, any offense in the NFL. So that, to me, signals that the Ravens, one, should bring back Tyler Linderbaum, because he was one of the best zone blocking prospects coming into the NFL out of Iowa. And the Ravens have weaponized him to a degree, but I think because of the fact that he was playing next to Daniel Failele these past 2 years, didn't really let him just get out there and be an elephant on parade and just use that elite quickness and elite skill set that he has to be a weapon in space, the same way that Jason Kelce was used on those kind of pin and pull and zone concepts in Philly. And I think that'll probably be instructive in just figuring out who exactly the Ravens could sign, could draft to replace Daniel Failele, and perhaps Andrew Voorhees at left guard there. So I think because of the outside zone stretch runs that Dwayne Ledford was so good at teaching, and I'm sure he has some familiarity with gap concepts and man concepts as well, that it won't be exclusively guys who are a little bit lighter and a little bit faster. But I do think it is a pretty obvious signal amid all this noise about what kind of offensive line the Ravens want to have.
So do you like the order in which they're doing this? Or do you think, in a way, they could be painting the offensive coordinator into a box by hiring an offensive line coach before they even hire the offensive coordinator?
I think you can run outside zone out of the pistol, you can run it out of the shotgun, you can run it out of under center, and you're not really that much of a high quality offensive run game coordinator if you're not compatible with a lot of different offensive setups. I mean, it's not news to anyone that there are only so many ways to run certain plays. There are only so many ways that you can orient guys on the field to get them open, or to do a run play, or to do a pass play. So I don't think the Ravens are boxing themselves in by hiring Dwayne Ledford. I just think that they're saying, this is what we want to do in the run game. This is what we're going to major in, but we are going to have some change-ups, because you need to have change-ups in the NFL.
Sure. In terms of the staff around that offensive side of the ball, they add Dwayne Ledford. They lose wide receivers coach Greg Lewis, who had been with the Ravens the last 3 years. Saw some good stuff from Greg Lewis. Saw some not so great stuff from those Ravens wide receivers. I mean, Zay's production, turning him into a 1,000-yard receiver, turning him into a multiple-time Pro Bowler, certainly a tick in Greg Lewis's favor. But then you look at what has happened to Rashad Bateman the last year, and him completely falling off in 2025. And I think you could say wide receiver group had some highlights and some lowlights under Greg Lewis.
Yeah, I think some of the good was also just the stuff that doesn't really show up on the box score, like
blocking,
the commitment to doing the dirty work, despite not really having a guy who's like 6'3", 220. So I think the Ravens and Greg Lewis should get some credit for that. But yeah, I was never really truly wowed by the development of this wide receiver room. It'll be interesting to see what the next guy could get out of a Devontae Walker or Rashad Bateman, if he still is on this team in 2026. The fact that the Ravens, again, did not block him from making this lateral move to Tennessee, I think should be pretty telling. If you wanted to get out of Baltimore and didn't feel like you would be happy under the next coach, whoever was going to be, then obviously I think it's good practice to be respectful of that and to let him interview. Going to a guy with a an offensive mind like Brian Daboll, I think it could probably be a pretty interesting fit for Greg Lewis. But I think there's a lot to work with and a lot to sell for the next guy that you bring in to be that wide receiver coach.
So Greg Lewis goes to the Titans. Who will be the Ravens offensive coordinator? We don't yet know. Jesse Minter said he's looking for an innovator, a connector. Those are kind of buzzwords that don't really tell us anything about who he's looking for. They have reportedly requested to interview the Bears offensive coordinator, Declan Doyle. And I know what you're thinking. Why would Declan Doyle want to leave Caleb Williams and a good system in Chicago in order to take the same job with the Ravens? And the answer is he probably doesn't have a whole lot of autonomy in Chicago because he has an offensive-minded head coach who is calling the plays, Ben Johnson. He could come to Baltimore and take over that side of the ball and be the offensive coordinator for a 2-time MVP. And a really interesting candidate, I think, in Declan Doyle.
Yeah, I think if you want to learn a little bit more about DD, can we call him DD? We probably shouldn't call him DD.
No. Have you met him?
DD the OC. That might be fun.
That would be.
There was an interview they did, I think, like 20 to 30 minutes with Ari Myrov, I believe is how you pronounce his last name, on his rising stars, behind the scenes type staffers before, I believe, this season, because I think this was year one for him in Chicago as the OC there. Just talked about working with Caleb Williams, talked about learning from Sean Payton, talked about how he got his start at Iowa. Didn't really, it was interesting to me that he didn't really own up to the fact that he probably got his job on that Iowa staff as like a grunt level intern because of who his dad was. And his dad is obviously the former and now somewhat disgraced strength and conditioning coach at Iowa. But, the fact that he was able to go from there, worked his connections to get a job in New Orleans under Sean Payton, hung around for a little bit with Dennis Allen, leapt to Denver, got a job there under Sean Payton when he made the move to the Broncos, and again reconnected with Chicago because I believe he had gotten to know Ben Johnson a little bit when he was interviewing for a job on that staff under Dan Campbell. So it's he, I think, struck me in terms of temperament and like straightforwardness. He reminded me a lot of Jesse Minter in terms of like how he was very forthright, didn't really spend a lot of time kind of shooting the shit, was very much down to talk ball, had a lighthearted side to him, but could really tell that he was all business. So it would be easy for me to see those guys hitting it off and feeling like they had a bit of each other in them if indeed the Bears grant that interview request. And I think the fact that we haven't heard that the fact that we haven't heard them say that they rejected it probably means that the interview is happening or has already happened. So we'll see what goes on there. But that will be the ultimate kind of black box hire because no play calling experience whatsoever. So you could be as optimistic or as pessimistic as you wanted to be because we just have no clue what he might be. It sounds like all he's really done there for Ben Johnson is do as much of the grunt work as possible so that Ben Johnson's job on a Wednesday to Saturday basis is as easy as possible.
This next guy that the Ravens will reportedly interview does have play calling experience, but it hasn't come for a few years. That's Lions assistant head coach and wide receiver coach Scotty Montgomery. He had some play calling experience when he worked under Mike Locksley at Maryland. Jonas, as a Maryland alum, having watched some Mike Locksley, does that make you like him more or less as a candidate?
I don't even know, though, if he was the play caller for those teams. I'll have to go back and check because obviously Mike Locksley has play calling chops himself. That's what he did so well at Alabama with Tua. There's always been a little bit of tension, especially in recent years when Maryland has not been very good about who exactly is calling shots, whose offense is actually being run there. So I'm not sure if he was a figurehead offensive coordinator at Maryland and just doing the kind of stuff that maybe Declan Doyle was doing in Chicago this past year. So we'll see. But it sounds like Dan Campbell really loves him in Detroit. You look at what he did with the running backs coaches as the running backs coach, got great production out of Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. He moved to wide receivers coach this past year. Jameson Williams goes for a career year. Amon-Ra St. Brown is again one of the NFL's best wide receivers.
Yeah, nice mix of talent there.
Yeah, and you're getting a lot of help from just the structure there you have in place from Dan Campbell in the offensive line and Jared Goff. But hard not to be impressed by what he's done at a positional level. But again, it would feel surprising to me if that guy comes out of nowhere to be the offensive coordinator here. And I don't know. Maybe we shouldn't undersell it because he's from a play calling level, he's no less qualified than a Declan Doyle. But I think we all see the association with Ben Johnson, and we kind of get stars in our eyes.
Yeah, it's sort of McVay-esque. Three guys that we have not heard the Ravens reportedly requesting or scheduling interviews with. Cliff Kingsbury, that's kind of interesting because of the report from Diana Rossini that she said she knew for a fact that Lamar Jackson and other members of that Ravens offense would like to have Cliff Kingsbury as their offensive coordinator. Nate Scheelhaus, the Rams pass game coordinator who interviewed for the Ravens head coaching job. ESPN reported that he is going to stay with Sean McVay after missing out on the Browns head coaching job, which we will talk about in just a bit. So he's probably not going to interview. And then finally, Davis Webb, who the Ravens also interviewed for their head coaching job. He's the pass game coordinator for the Broncos. Broncos, after getting eliminated from the playoffs, fired their offensive coordinator, Joe Lombardi, after I don't know what he could have done, considering the situation that they found themselves in, starting Jared Stidham and not Bo Nix, and only scoring 7 points in absolute blizzard conditions. But to me, my first reaction to that is, are they just going to promote Davis Webb to their offensive coordinator once they satisfy the Rooney Rule?
Right.
So Davis Webb could be just staying around, but maybe that opens the door for Joe Lombardi and that Broncos offense, which had a pretty good year with Bo Nix, who I think we all acknowledge is a good, not great quarterback.
Yeah, I think I'm really curious to see what exactly the next step is with Davis Webb, because I think he's a guy who the Ravens really liked going through that first wave of interviews. Obviously, they couldn't have talked to him during the week that they talked to Jesse Minter and finalized their decision that he was going to be the guy, because the Broncos were still going in the playoffs, and you couldn't talk to him until this past Monday. I believe the reporting out of Denver was that the decision to fire Lombardi was independent of any desire to keep Davis Webb. Not that they don't want to keep him, but I think it's going to be a very interesting decision there, because I think Davis Webb is among the 2 or 3 finalists for the Raiders head coaching job. But it sounds like the reporting from ESPN, I think NFL Network, is that Clint Kubiak is going to be, or is the heavy favorite to get that job. But obviously, with the Seahawks being in the Super Bowl, everything is kind of on hold there and making a decision. But that would be the last job to be filled, I believe, along with the Cardinals. And I don't think Davis Webb is seriously in the mix there. So does Davis Webb want to stay in Denver, stay with a guy that he knows, but not have the opportunity to call plays because Sean Payton is the one calling the shots there? Or does he want to maybe make a little bit more money here in Baltimore, work with a better quarterback, have more autonomy over the offense, and potentially elevate himself into the very top tier of the 2027 coaching candidates? It's tough to say. We don't know what his thinking is. We don't know what his agent's thinking is. But I think that is a guy to just keep your eye on in terms of what the reporting from the national guys is going to be over these next couple of days.
Yeah. In terms of a defensive coordinator hire, Jesse Minter said today he's going to handle the play calling duties on that side of the ball. So this is not as important of a hire because you have a defensive head coach who is going to be calling those plays. But there are some interesting names out there. Perhaps a blow to the Ravens' search for their defensive coordinator was the Chargers hiring Chris O'Leary as their defensive coordinator. He was the co-DC with Minter at Michigan, also worked as the safeties coach under Minter with the Chargers while Minter was the defensive coordinator there in 2024. Did you think Chris O'Leary was going to be high up on Jesse Minter's list of potential defensive coordinators in Baltimore?
Yeah, and a little bit of behind-the-scenes stuff. I think I got the sense that something was afoot. Obviously been doing a lot of reaching out to players and coaches who've worked with Jesse Minter over the years. And obviously I saw that, Chris O'Leary was on the Chargers staff in 2024 before heading to Western Michigan as the defensive coordinator in 2015. So I reached out to his SID at Western Michigan, I think on Sunday. And within like 10 to 15 minutes, I got a pretty quick no that he will not be available. So the fact that things were progressing that quickly, I got the sense that he's probably not long for Western Michigan. It was just a matter of which team was going to sweep him up. And I think the Chargers got a great hire. I think he turned Western Michigan around from like a top 90 offense to a top 10 offense, top 15 offense in 1 year. Just done a great job there. So probably less attractive because of the play calling opportunities coming to work with his old friend in Baltimore than it is to reunite with Jim Harbaugh in that Chargers defense in 2026. But I think the Ravens, because you have Jesse Minter calling the plays, it's not really a huge blow. I think you just want a guy with a certain degree of experience, a certain amount of expertise to come in and reinvigorate one facet or another of this Ravens defense.
Yeah, one guy that Jesse Minter does have experience with, Chiefs defensive line coach Joe Cullen. We talked about him recently as well. I think we talked about him on our last podcast too. Defensive line coach since 2022, served as the Jaguars DC in 2021, but worked with Jesse Minter as the Ravens defensive line coach from 2016 to 2020. So he has a Jesse Minter connection. He has a Ravens connection that could certainly help him. And then the Ravens also requested an interview with Jim Leonard, who is the assistant head coach and defensive pass game coordinator for the Broncos. He played a year in Baltimore under John Harbaugh. John Harbaugh's first year in 2008. It was a defensive coordinator at Wisconsin. He interviewed for the Chargers job, which went to O'Leary, and is in the mix for the Bills defensive coordinator job, which would be a play calling job because they hired an offensive head coach. And then, of course, we have to throw out Anthony Weaver's name as well, because as of this moment, Anthony Weaver has not found a new home as the Dolphins turn over their coaching staff. So have to include him in there as well, because he shared a staff with Jesse Minter in Baltimore.
We should also mention Klink, aka Steve Clinkscale, who we talked about with Chris Rim on the Ravens hiring Jesse Minter podcast a couple of times ago. I think you might have gotten unless there were three co-coordinators at Michigan. I think he was the one who was co-coordinator.
Oh, gotcha. Sorry.
With Jesse Minter in Michigan. He
That's
was
right.
The defensive backs coach, has worked as the Chargers defensive backs coach since 2024. We were wondering if he was going to be the guy who got the promotion and the head job as the DC there in LA, with Jesse come on over to Baltimore. But obviously they went with Chris O'Leary. So maybe Klink thinks that coming over to Baltimore to be the non-play calling defensive coordinator is a better setup for him than just remaining in place in LA.
Yeah. All right. On the other side of another quick break, we're going to talk about that controversial Cleveland Browns hire.
For the fifth year in a row, Toyota is the best resale value brand according to Kelley Blue Book's KBB.com, including the 2025 Grand Highlander, best in resale value for midsize SUVs. Toyota, let's go places.
All right, Jonas, I don't know if you saw, but there's been another hire in the AFC North, and it has come with some controversy within the Browns building. Yes, the team we're talking about is the Cleveland Browns. They've hired Todd Monken as their next head coach. He is reportedly taking offensive line coach George Warhop with him as well. This is controversial because Jim Schwartz was a serious candidate for that job, and the reports are that he was devastated he did not get the head coaching job. The Browns ownership desperately wanted whoever was going to be the new head coach to keep Jim Schwartz on as their defensive coordinator. Doesn't look like that's going to be likely. I have seen the tweet that contains the idea that Todd Monken and Jim Schwartz be co-head coaches. Jonas, what do you think of that idea?
That's the dumbest thing I've heard today.
It is the worst idea I've ever heard.
There are certain national reporters in the NFL who just probably need an editor.
Yeah, for their tweets.
Yes.
How is this going to go? How is Todd Monken going to coach this Browns team? How is his relationship with Shedeur Sanders going to go? Are they going to add another quarterback? What is this going to look like?
I did laugh at a suggestion like that was yes-anding to the co-head coach thing, which was why stop at a co-head coaching thing when we can have a triumvirate role where it's Todd Monken, it's Jim Schwartz, and then Deion Sanders being the third leg of that stool.
All right.
So why not? Let's YOLO it up.
Why not do a player coach?
Right.
Myles Garrett, player coach.
I would love that. Yeah, I think Todd's going to be an interesting fit there. I think he's not exactly playing with a stacked deck. Like, that offensive line was in shambles past couple of years, and I think they are probably set for a complete overhaul there. Is he going to turn to Deshaun Watson if Deshaun Watson is the answer at quarterback? If he's the guy
who's
who's
healthy?
Yeah, I think he was pretty healthy toward the end of the year. They just didn't want to play him. He's got some nice young pieces there with Harold Fannin. The running backs are are pretty impressive. The defense, I think, can be a top 10 unit again, but is it going to be the same without Jim Schwartz? Who knows? So I'm rooting for Todd. I think it's always awesome to have a head coach with that kind of old school sensibility, that kind of gruff personality. I am curious to see. Yeah, I am curious to see just how quickly he might wear out his welcome in Cleveland with that kind of nasty sports talk media that they have there. And obviously they've been embittered by year after year of failure and just the sadness factory that has been that Browns team. But
maybe not nasty, maybe just, I don't know, aggressive. I don't know.
Yeah, right. So we'll see. I mean, he has familiarity with the AFC North. Maybe that gives him a leg up on the other candidates who might have been coming in. You know, Nate Scheelhaus most prominent among them. But if you don't have a quarterback, it's tough to get your offense to the level that he got the Ravens offense to. It's even tougher to do that when you have one of the NFL's worst wide receiver rooms and one of the NFL's least stable offensive lines. So if he can get this offense to being even a top 20 unit next year, he might be in the running for coach of the year. But it just feels like they are, again, just stuck on the treadmill of mediocrity.
And when you have a massive dead weight contract taking up so much of your salary cap as well that you can't really move or cut.
Yeah.
All right. That just about does it for the Banner Ravens podcast. Please like, rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. You can find the Banner Ravens podcast live on Facebook, X, and YouTube to see our lovely faces. You can also listen to us after the fact anywhere that you get your podcasts. At Jonas_Shaffer is his handle. I'm at Paul Mancano. Our own Gianna Hahn is at the Senior Bowl right now, so follow her coverage at Gianna_Jade. Kyle Goon is writing great columns. Subscribe to the Baltimore Banner. Thanks so much for tuning in. Jonas Shaffer, I'm Paul Mancano.